I'm Billy Hollowell. Welcome to the Inside Story. On today's show, we are diving into all things Israel. Obviously, a lot happening around Israel. There's the House Antisemitism bill, which we'll talk about. We'll get into a number of other issues. Obviously, the encampments and the college campus protests that have been ongoing, as well as K-12 schools and some of the issues that and the claims that have been going on around there as well. I'm excited today to be joined by Samantha Kamman from the Christan Post. How you doing?
Doing very well. Thank you. It's good to be able to talk with you again.
Well, you've been busy covering a lot of what has been going on, and it's almost hard to really comprehend the scale because all of these protests, there's things happening all over the country, right? And every one of them looks different from the other one when it comes to Israel and Palestine. But I wanna sort of pull back a little bit and start with this House anti-Semitism bill because it's sparked a lot of debate, and we'll get into the controversy and the debate around it. But first, can you tell us a little bit about the bill for those who don't know?
Sure. So the House Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, it passed with a bipartisan vote. It was 320 to 91, would require the U.S. Department of Education to use the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism when enforcing federal anti-discrimination laws. So the definition includes things like denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination and labeling the creation of the State of Israel as a racist endeavor in examples of contemporary anti-Semitism. So former President Donald Trump actually referred to the definition in a December 2019 executive order on combating anti-Semitism, which required federal agencies to consider the working definition of anti-Semitism that the IHRA approved in 2016. So the bill had 61 co-sponsors, which also included many Democrats.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, this is a complex issue, and there have been a lot of debates that have come out of it. When it comes to this bill, despite attracting people from both sides of the aisle, what was it that sparked controversy and debate? If you can just sort of take us through some of that, because that was really interesting to watch as well. I guess everything today sparks debate, but what was it about this bill in particular that did that?
So critics of the bill, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think her criticism is one that seemed to get the most attention. She claimed it would convict Christians of anti-Semitism who believe the gospel that says Jesus was handed over to Herod by the Jews to be crucified. Another critic of the bill was Democratic Representative Jerry Nadler, who happens to be Jewish, and he even described himself as a committed Zionist when he expressed opposition to the bill on the House floor. But his problem with it is he said the enforcement of the federal civil rights law doesn't depend on defining terms like anti-Semitism or racism. And another issue he said is that this could actually potentially undermine federal civil rights law because he said that anti-Semitism, it's different from other forms of bigotry because it evolves over time. And so he said that conduct that comes to be understood as anti-Semitic could then end up not meeting the definition.
Gosh, so I mean, are there any legs to these claims? I mean, how have people reacted to them? These critics, what they're saying about the bill, and sort of where do things stand on that front?
So Representative Mike Lawler denied claims that the bill would ban the Bible or limit free speech. He again cited the fact that this definition was used in President Trump's executive order. Another thing that political pundits like Ian Hayworth, who used to work for Daily Wire, pointed out, which addressed Marjorie Taylor Greene's criticism that it would convict Christians of anti-Semitism who talk about that the Jews turned Jesus over to Herod to be crucified. Mentioned, okay, there's a difference between blaming all Jews for the crucifixion of Jesus as opposed to just saying, okay, this is something that happened and the Bible tells us that. Daily Wire host Ben Shapiro also analyzed the bill on his show, and he said that some of the language in the bill is vague and badly worded and asserted that some parts could raise free speech concerns. And one of the points that he made was that the definition of anti-Semitism, it includes comparing contemporary Israeli policies to Nazis, which Shapiro argued that might have worked in the past, but it doesn't really now because people today compare a lot of things to Nazis. So, for example, how today people often say, oh, you disagree with me, you're a Nazi, or Trump is Hitler, or Biden is Hitler, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, these are actually really important conversations to have about free speech when you have something like this that is well intended, right? You know, thinking through, okay, the assumption here is it's well intended. If this well intended thing is happening, what are the effects of it, right? Are they going to be good? Are they going to be bad? And I think it's good for people to talk about these things and understand them. And you just did a great job of helping us sort of understand the different sides of what people have said, both in support and against the bill. But I do want to transition gears here a little bit because one of the big stories, obviously, the last month and a half has been these pro-Palestinian encampments, the college campus chaos. You had a group of people overtaking a building at Columbia a few weeks back. I mean, this has been crazy to watch and it has really intensified. But what is the current state of the pro-Palestinian encampments and the college campus protests in light of the fact, the school year is ending? Obviously, some commencements have been canceled, but the school year is ending. Where do we currently stand at this moment?
So some schools have tried different approaches, and there's been criticism and praise of both. So some schools have turned to law enforcement, others have tried negotiating. So Columbia University, which I think is a school most people are familiar with, canceled its main commencement ceremony due to security concerns. And it's, yes, just as you mentioned, at Columbia University, tensions really escalated after demonstrators took over a building on campus. The NYPD was called in, they arrested around 300 people. UCLA also switched to remote learning due to protests on campus. I believe they were remote for more than a week, but I believe I saw a report saying that they're back on campus now. There was a violent clash that made media headlines between pro and anti Israel demonstrators. Police later arrested around 200 people. There appears to have been an incident before this clash that involved a Jewish woman being knocked unconscious. There are reports of other incidents on campus of demonstrators blocking students from accessing class at the library. Some are even asking people to show you have the correct wristband on before you can enter, show you're not a Zionist. A school that decided not to go with a law enforcement approach but went down the negotiation route. Northwestern University entered into an agreement with the demonstrators that includes offering like nearly 1.9 million in scholarship funds and for hiring faculty positions. The This has been met with some controversy as well too. Like some people criticize the law enforcement approach, but Northwestern University's approach has also received some criticism, particularly from the Midwestern branch of the Anti Defamation League, which claims that the university's president should resign. They're saying he failed to stop hatred and bigotry.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost unimaginable that we're having these conversations in 2024, right? I mean, that I think everybody can sort of say, like, how are these things happening? Some of the examples you just gave are very troubling examples of wristbands and not allowing people to enter certain areas of campus. It's one thing to protest, it's another thing to have these litmus tests that are very clearly aimed at discriminating against a group of people. And yet this is happening. It's concerning that it's happening in so many places, right? And I think that's what has a lot of people a little alarmed at the moment and trying to understand the ins and outs of it. One of the other places, obviously, it's been the colleges that have gotten the attention, but there have also been allegations of anti-Semitism, pro-Palestinian content in K-12 schools, in public schools. There was even a House hearing recently
Mhm.
on that matter. What's going on there, and what happened at that hearing that's maybe worth discussing?
So, a few points of note. The first one that I talk about is Elise Stefanik. She pressed the New York City Department of Education Chancellor David Banks about how the former principal of Hillcrest High School now has a senior position within the education department. So, this principal was in charge when hundreds of students led a riot against a Jewish teacher after a photo surfaced of her attending a pro Israel rally. Now, Banks said he couldn't confirm the man's current position at the hearing, but repeatedly throughout the hearing, he kept giving assurances that the department is taking anti Semitism seriously. Several students at different schools have been suspended. And one of the points that he made when asked, like, okay, well, why haven't there been more terminations? He said, we still have to follow due process before we can do that. Now, Stefanik, you'll recall that she made a lot of headlines when she was questioning the three university professors, including or university presidents, including the president of Harvard, was asking about whether calling for the genocide of Jews violated their respective codes of conduct. She, at this hearing, made a comment about how it feels like at all these hearings, we've just been getting a lot of lip service, but there hasn't been any accountability or enforcement. Other notable testimony came from the superintendent of the Berkeley Unified School District, which is currently uh, the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights announced a formal investigation into a complaint against the school district. District has been accused of failing to take action despite numerous reports of anti-Semitic harassment against the Jewish community in the district. So it's not just students picking on other students, but teachers have reportedly shared anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas images in class or accused Israel of appropriating Palestinian culture. There is one point that stood out to me during the hearing where the superintendent was asked about a slide included in curriculum that was shared with students that said, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which many consider to be it's calling for the genocide of Jews or eradication of Israel. The slide said it's a call for freedom for some Palestinians. And the superintendent was asked if she thought it was appropriate to tell students that. And she said that the district believes in exposing students to diversity of ideas and perspectives. And she said, if this was presented as a different perspective, then I do think it's appropriate. I mean, she did state during her testimony that the district investigates claims of anti-Semitism, although she said at one point that she doesn't believe anti-Semitism is pervasive at Berkeley.
Gosh, yeah, and it's one of, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say it carefully. This is one of those challenging things where harassment should not be tolerated, mistreatment should not be tolerated. On the flip side, there's a line where there's free speech, right? Where people are saying, we don't agree with these actions, right? And it becomes difficult in these heated moments sometimes to discern when it's a he said, she said, to what level did this rise, right? And again, it's anecdotal. It depends on each circumstance. The things you were mentioning earlier that are happening on campuses and some of what you just talked about, completely unacceptable. And then, trying to find that balance between protecting groups of people and defending what is true and right and allowing people to have free speech. This is an ongoing struggle and battle in many facets of life. And I think this is just the latest one that we're sort of watching play out right now. But Samantha, any final words before we go?
Just it's like what you said. I think a lot of universities are trying to find that fine line between free speech, satisfying one set of people, but they also are trying to acknowledge anti Semitism and call it out because there are actions that have made Jewish students not feel safe. Like at Columbia University, it was a group of pro Israel demonstrators at one point that went out to the encampment. They had American and Israeli flags, were playing Jewish songs and the U.S. national anthem. And somebody went out with a sign that said Al Qassem's next targets, pointing to the Jewish students. And that's referring to Hamas, which committed the October 7th massacre.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this is a new frontier right now, I think, for people to understand. And really at the core of this, how alarming it is that the Jewish people are facing this around the world, not just here in America. We're obviously talking about the things happening here, but around the world, we're sort of watching this resurgence of anti-Semitism, and it was coming well before October 7th, right? October 7th, I think, infused it for some reason more. But there'll be a lot more to unpack on these stories as time goes on. Samantha, I really appreciate you coming on today to break it all down.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Everyone else, make sure you head on over to the Christian Post. And in the meantime, make sure you're subscribing and liking this podcast, rating this podcast. 5-star reviews are welcome on the platforms in which you're listening. As for this show, we will be back next week with another episode. Thanks for listening.